Did you know that there is a tradition among birders that is over 120 years old? Or that the results of this tradition have been invaluable to better understanding bird populations and their trends, not only across the U.S., but also across North America and even on other continents? We'll learn more about this tradition, how you can participate, and much more in this episode of the Backyard Ecology podcast. Nature isn't just out there in some far-off exotic location. It's all around us, including right outside our doors. Hi, my name is Shannon Trimboli, and I am the host of Backyard Ecology. I invite you to join us as we ignite our curiosity and natural wonder, explore our yards and communities, and improve our local pollinator and wildlife habitat. Hi, everyone. Before we get started, I wanted to thank all of my supporters on Patreon. Their monthly donations help make Backyard Ecology possible. If you would like to join them, you can do so for less than the cost of a cup of coffee or a meal at your favorite fast food place. I'll have links in the show notes for the Backyard Ecology Patreon page, blog, YouTube channel, and email list. Today we are talking to James Wheat. James is the president of the Kentucky Ornithological Society and the regional editor for the Christmas bird counts in Kentucky. Hi, James. Welcome to Backyard Ecology. Thanks for talking with us today.
It's my pleasure. It's great to be here.
And I am so happy to have you here. And one of the reasons that I'm really looking forward to this is because our conversation today is going to talk about a couple of different things that I've always really enjoyed. One being birding and two being community science projects. But before we really get into that, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into birding?
Yes. Like a lot of people, when I was a kid, I was interested in science and dinosaurs in particular. And once I figured out how you identify one type of dinosaur from another, it quickly transposed into looking out my window and seeing birds and saying, well, that looks like a woodpecker, but I wonder what kind of woodpecker it is. And then my dad saw me do this, and he had some old binoculars, these old Bushnell binoculars with a leather case, and with one of the prisms askew. So it was a little double vision, but that was the key to a lifetime now of passion for birding. And of course, shortly thereafter, for birthday or Christmas, I got a new pair of binoculars and a field guide, and it was just wonderful ever since. I still get the same amount of joy looking at a common bird today that I did back then. And that's a gift that I hope other people can get from birding as well.
Oh, yes. And birding's so much fun because it doesn't matter where you go or where you live. There are birds. I mean, different kinds of birds, but there are birds. And you can enjoy them in so many different ways, whether it's feeding them, watching them out your window, making a checklist of these are the species I've seen, or just going, oh, that's pretty cool behavior, and just watching and enjoying them. I mean, you can go as deep as you want to with them.
Yes. And the thing that's, when you really get into it, what I really enjoy the most is that feeling of being in the flow state. It kind of a mindfulness thing where you're just hearing and seeing and scanning and perceiving, and it's just a wonderful state to be in when you're just connected with the birds and, see a deer or whatever, and then somebody comes along and asks, what are you seeing? And you have a big smile and you say, well, I've seen some cardinals, and it's just a joyful state of being, and it's a fun thing to do. And it's a great way to diffuse stress and just to be outdoors. It's great.
Yes, exactly. Well, the main thing that we wanted to talk about today is the Christmas bird count, which, if you're in the birding circles and stuff like that, you may hear sometimes called the CBC. And back when I was developing and coordinating citizen science projects or community science projects a lot, I really like to refer to the Christmas bird count because it's an example of probably the oldest and longest running community science project in the US. So there's a lot of history there. But before we talk about the Christmas bird count in depth, I think we should probably start at the beginning and just can you tell us a little bit about what is the Christmas bird count?
Sure. So the Christmas bird count essentially is a winter bird census. And, a census meaning that there's a certain protocol that is used to sample the data. So the Christmas bird count circles are all the same size, and all the people who run the Christmas bird counts, called compilers, are expected to ensure that people are tracking the data and counting the birds in the same way so that they can compare apples to apples. So historically, back in 1900, there was a tradition of what was called a side hunt, which was people would go out and compete against each other to see how big of a game bag, that is, how big a pile of dead things with fur, feathers, or whatever they could compile in the course of the Christmas day. And Frank Chapman decided, he was just so appalled by that, decided to offer an alternative, and that would be to count the birds, or in this case, the birds, so that it would eventually then become an official census that since 1900 has been used to inform lots of other research projects that have to do with climate change or just general population trends and expansions and contractions of species ranges and things, based on 120 plus years of data gathered around the same period of time using the same sampling protocol in 15 miles radius circles. And it's just a wonderful data base of information, long-term information, as you mentioned, that I don't think is paralleled anywhere else.
No, I don't think so either. And like you said, I mean, the research that's been done with this data is amazing. And the only reason that it can be done and it exists is because so many people volunteer to do this year after year after year. And it has continued and it has grown. I mean, no one researcher could ever be in all these different locations all across the country to do this, much less be able to do it for 122 years now.
Right. And, in Kentucky, for example, we've got almost 40 Christmas bird count circles. And that alone is a gigantic task to manage. So if you can imagine, in the US or on the planet, how many CBCs there are, which it's now global. I mean, it's been global for a long time, but it's mostly in the US. But you can look at some of the ArcGIS maps on the Audubon website, and you can see where all these counts are. And they're in the Caribbean, they're in South America, they're in North America, they're in Asia, Africa, Europe, even a couple of in Antarctica that get just a few species, but it's just a thing and people love it. And that's what keeps it going. I started doing them back in 1977 and I just fell in love with it. And I haven't missed a year since, because it's a lot of fun. It's work. It's not easy, but man, it's just great to put in effort with your birding peers and your friends and your colleagues in your community. It's a great feeling to accomplish that each year, and you feel like you've achieved something, and that's a great feeling.
Yeah, it is. And you are achieving something and you're helping to contribute to something that is so important, and that is more than just one person or a handful of people. I mean, like you said, this is a global effort, and the results, especially over time and the longevity of it, is just amazing. But so you said you've been doing this since the 1977. Tell us what a typical Christmas bird count day looks like then.
Yes, so that can vary depending on what you've got in front of you. So personally, it mostly involves getting up early, packing a lunch, reviewing my agenda for the day. I've got 13 stops that I need to make on a certain route to cover all the areas in my section of a count circle. I'm getting my thermos ready full of hot tea and a quick breakfast, get to the count circle. It's important to document mileage and time. So as soon as I get in the count circle, I'll mark the mileage on my vehicle, right? Make a note. Mm-hmm. And what time is it? So because that, tracking the effort data is critical. How much time you spend and, how far you go. So I make sure that I get that organized. I make sure that I have all my camera, my binoculars, my snacks, and I just go and I do my route. I use eBird, and I have a notepad that I take any relevant or pertinent notes as it relates to the day, what's happening, the weather, and I bird my route. Now around midday, because I'm a compiler as well. The example is I'm a compiler. So around noon, what I'll do is I'll check in with the different section leaders to see presence or absence for all the species that we expect for the day. And what that does is it gives me the gaps. So for example, we haven't seen any waterfowl. We haven't seen any sparrows. We know they're here. Well, let's pay special attention in the afternoon to try to pick up some of those extra species. Now, we're not focusing 100% on species diversity at the expense of counting individuals, because the number of cardinals matters. But, if you know that there's species there that you just haven't gotten yet, it is kind of important to get the representative sample in the count circle that you can. So, and then the most fun part is the camaraderie of the compilation dinner, which at the end of the day, after COVID or following COVID protocol, of course, we get together to have what's called a compilation dinner. Some people call it a tally rally. And the purpose of it is to tell the stories about what what experience your day was like, to have a potluck dinner and break bread together. And then comes the compilation, where you get all of the representatives from the different sections in usually a circle or around a table. And you have, in my case, I have a spreadsheet on my laptop with all the species listed, and I type in what people have seen during the day. So for example, Canada goose is a common first species on the list. So I'll call out Canada goose, and then the first group will tell me how many they've seen, then the second group and the third, et cetera, all the way through. And if they haven't seen any, it'll be 0 or pass. And I'll enter that into the spreadsheet all the way down the list of expected species, so that I can know how many individuals of each species that we've seen, because I've tallied it all and compiled it all into the spreadsheet, and it does the math for me, but also how many species we've gotten, which is a fun way to measure your effort against last year's species total. But this is where the fun begins, because when everybody gets back together in the compilation, they don't tell all the really cool stuff that they've seen, the rarities or the unexpected things. And so once you get down to the last species, it's like, okay, what have you seen that isn't on the list? And everyone sort of scoots their seat in a little closer because they want to know what the first rare bird is and where it was, and planning the next day to go see it. So it's the suspense there is just really wonderful, and that part is probably what sparked my passion for the Christmas bird count specifically, because of that suspense, because of that joy of sharing fun stuff and the details about the finding of it and the photographing of the rarity, and so that's really, and then everybody tells a couple more stories and everyone's yawning by then, and we've been birding all day, and so that really is the day in the life of a participant in the Christmas bird count. And I certainly hope that you can hear the smile in my voice on the podcast, and that it really resonates with your audience, or our audience, because I feel like I'm part of this audience too, because it really is a great experience, and to tie in, especially when you think about the historic aspect of the longevity of the Christmas bird count and the linkage to citizen science, it really is meaningful. And I hope it catches with some new people in your audience.
Oh, yeah. And you can definitely tell that this is something that you've done for a while and that you're passionate about it and love to do it. And that's a great, I think, big picture overview. Let's step back a little bit with that, though, because you mentioned a couple of terms in there and things that I'm not sure people will get if they don't know kind of a little bit more about the Christmas bird count and how it's run.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about a count circle.
Yes.
When you say a count circle, you're talking about the radius that you said was 15 miles, right?
15-mile diameter, 7.5-mile radius.
Yes. I couldn't remember which one it was. Yeah. 15-mile diameter that you're driving it, correct, or walking?
Well, so it is a fixed circle over time. It doesn't move around. It's a fixed circle. It's a scientific sample. And the way that people normally do it is they subdivide it into sections, manageable sections. For example, I'm the compiler for the Louisville, Kentucky Christmas bird count. We've got 9 sections, and each section leader manages the places that are important to hit in his or her section, who's going to hit them and when, so they're not double counting. And it is walking, it is driving in the car, it is horse and buggy for some of our friends in Kentucky who get around with a horse and buggy and who are great birders, bicycle, golf cart, you name it, kayak, canoe, boat. We count birds any way we can cover as effectively and fully as possible the entirety of the circle, to the extent that we have access to the property. So there's a lot of private property in Kentucky that we don't have access to. Some of our CBCs, we really can only access about some portion of it, but we do the best we can.
So you've got it divided out. Everybody's going. Are they going to the same spots within the circle every year, or do those change up, or does it depend on the year?
What it depends on is whether, for example, the water is flowing or frozen, or whether land developers have blown up all the trees and there's a bunch of cookie cutter houses there instead of woodland or wetland, and how many people get to cover it. Because, if you've got a shortage of volunteers, as we did with COVID, then you kind of have to prioritize the more productive spots in your section, and you might have to forego some of the more marginal ones, like, a little softball park that, you double check to pick up, a couple woodpeckers or some robins on the ground. You may have to skip those because you just don't have time if you don't have the right number of people to cover. So, but generally speaking, optimally, you've got the same people covering the same section and the same hotspots or the same stops in each section over time for consistency of sampling. Yes, but we're all volunteers. And so that, if you've got someone who's got a marriage that they have to travel to during the holidays or family requirements, you have to flex.
Right. And I mean, one thing this year that's probably going to affect us in Kentucky and possibly many people in other states is we're coming off of a drought, and we've got a lot of vernal pools, at least in the area that I'm at. Vernal pools, seasonal lakes and stuff that are not necessarily as wet as they've been in some of our previous years right now. So that's going to also affect what's going to be there. And I would expect potentially affect where they fall on the priority list.
Yes. And, if there's less water in a transient pond, it's more likely to be frozen if the weather's cold and birds can't really use it. So, yeah, I mean, all of those things matter. And then as the regional editor, I have to be in touch with people who are really smart about those trends and the weather and that sort of thing. So I understand some of those larger meta type phenomena that are going to affect the results, because it's not enough to have the same people doing the same stops in the same section in the same Christmas bird count over time, because you also could have a big snow day or raining all day long. That's also going to affect it. But you're documenting that stuff too, so If you've got similar effort but lower results, it may be because of the the drought conditions, or precipitation, or wind, or other things that affect how visible and detectable birds are. Because if it's super windy, a lot of the songbirds are just clutching onto branches and sitting tight and riding the storm out.
Yeah.
They're harder to detect. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is something that really goes on once the dates are set. And it's not always on Christmas. Not all the bird counts happen on Christmas.
Very good point. Yeah, the count period is always December 14 through January 5. And so that means that every year there's more weekend days or less, but it's a 23-day window. That's been consistent. I don't remember exactly when that was formalized, but generally speaking, all of the Christmas bird counts from 1900 have all been within that window. But if it's booked and it's going to be raining, and you've got a flexible team of people who know the section and have flexibility, you can have a rain day. You can push it. The challenge is, if you've got proximal CBC circles, you want to make sure that you don't step on somebody else's count day, because you may share participants, and you don't want to have that conflict. So you really have to manage when you run your CBC, so you're not poaching talent from other people. You want to be considerate with your fellow birders and your friends. And then sometimes people are just like, what, it's a scientific sample, and if it's raining all day, well, we're just going to get fewer birds, but they'll just march on. So it really just depends on, if you've got people who are working who don't have the flexibility to do it on Monday instead of Sunday, then you just march forward.
So you mentioned that you're going and you're doing this stuff. How often are you by yourself versus with a group of people when you're doing the Christmas bird counts?
So that really depends on a lot of things. We want there to be as many people as possible helping out. I mean, that can get problematic if you've got too many people, but generally that hasn't been the case in my experience. I mean, usually there's a few people in a group, or what we call a party, which is a group of people who are birding together. There are times when you bird alone, but when you're birding alone, usually it's somebody who has a camera, who, if they see something that needs to be documented, they're able to do that, or can record the audio, or use a spotting scope to get a better look, for example. And sometimes we have to have groups of one, because we just don't have enough volunteers to cover. I mean, 15-mile radius or diameter circle is big. That's a lot of land. And again, it's better to have more than one person in a party, but sometimes that can't be helped.
Yeah, it's always nice to be able to say, now, did you see, was that a wing bar? Was that or not? And to have that person to bounce things off. And then if you do find one of those rare, weird things, you want to have somebody else that can say, yeah, that was one of these rare, weird things that we want to get excited about and keep secret, so we can hopefully have the best weird, rare thing at the compilation party.
But if another person is there and they disagree with you, then that is equally exciting, because then you have the debate. And then, especially if the bird is still there, you can say, well, what about this? Or what about that? Or I don't see this. Or, well, that's just a trick of the light, or an artifact of the sun reflecting on the feathers, or some other such critical thinking process between the two that is more effective than if it's just one person, because you've got confirmation bias and other such things that can lull you into thinking that, oh, that's the rarity. The old saying, if you hear hoofbeats in North America, think horses and not zebras. Well, if you're by yourself, you might be more likely thinking zebra. Here recently, we've had a Kentucky state first pink-footed goose in Shelby County that has been the rage of the internet, and people are just rushing over there. If it was just one person who saw it, and didn't have great photographs, there would be a big debate about what it was. But if it sticks around so more people can see it, that's the beauty of having more eyes than just two, more ears than just two. and more cameras than just one phone camera.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm betting that if it sticks around, I know the first stop that whoever's in that circle is going to make.
Yes, I just had a conversation yesterday while I was there looking for the bird with the compiler for that Shelbyville CBC, and yes, we're hoping that it sticks around.
Yes.
It wouldn't be the first time that we've had such things. I mean, snowy owls have occurred around the state, and Daviess County, for example, was able to get it on count day. So there's count day, which is obviously the day of the counts, but there's also what's called the count week, which is 3 days before and 3 days after. The species that you find on those dates don't count for the CBC, but because it may be important to document that, well, we didn't get it on count day, but we had a green heron in this, in the count circle around the count period. That's another thing that the CBC data will capture, right? Just as sort of a catch-all in case you miss something important. So.
Right. Because the birds don't always, I mean, even if it's there, it may not show up at the exact same moment that you're there. I mean, we've all done that even on non-count days when we're just like, oh, I want to go see something that somebody else saw. And then you go and you spend all day looking for it and it never shows up. And then the next day they're like, oh yeah, here it is, where it was supposed to be. And you're like, yeah, right.
Yeah. And of course there are other things that are, tough, legitimately tough to detect. Mm-hmm. And they may be there in good numbers, but you just can't get them to chip note or call or sing because they're hunkering down in the cold or in the wind. So yeah, that's why count week birds are considered, I think.
Yeah. And I guess it also helps with some of those times when it's been good weather and then count day just happens to be the day it rains or the wind's 20 miles an hour, or like we said, all those weather conditions that get thrown at you, because this is real life and it's nature and yes, it's hard to plan. You have to be ready for these crazy things when you're doing field work.
Yeah. Yeah. And some days it's just not birdie. There's a phrase that doesn't really have a birding equivalent, but that's why they call it fishing and not catching.
Yes.
Some days you're just not going to get birds.
Mm-hmm.
But that washes out over time. Over 122 years, you're going to have some weaker performances or production and some stronger. And that's just the way that it works.
Exactly. So who can participate with this? Because it is all volunteers.
It is. And we do welcome people of all skill levels. And it is important to, I think, get the experience of a Christmas bird count when you're newer at this, because of the excitement, because of the urgency of the limits of time based on the amount of area you need to cover, because you do want to legitimately cover a certain amount of area. So you can't spend too much time in any one particular spot. And I do want to say here that one of the challenges is that there are some who feel maybe intimidated because of that sense of urgency and that moving from one spot to the other. But I would encourage people to give it a try, because yes, that is true. There is that, but please don't feel intimidated, because we're all wanting to spend more time with the birds, but we know that in order to cover the count circle, we need to move along. So you may be disappointed that you don't get to study that, that song sparrow as much as you'd like, or listen to it sing for as long as you'd like to listen to it. But you can always go back the next day or the next week or whatever. But again, you may miss stuff, or you may feel a little bit intimidated by some jargon or something, but please open your mind and give it a shot. When I first started, for example, I was the guy holding the clipboard, taking dictation from the birders who were saying, 4 laughing gulls. And I would try to find laughing gull on the taxonomically sequenced list on the clipboard, which made me learn the taxonomic sequence, which was a good thing. Enabled me to keep track and to clearly note on the page 4, so that, if I have to keep adding notes to that particular species, I want to make sure that I can discern, if there's a 4 and then a 1 next to each other, that it's 4 plus 1, not 41, right? So you have to carefully mark your page. Nowadays, a lot of people use eBird. But to the point, it's important that people of all skill levels have the experience, because I think that they'll get the joy and the urgency. And, this is different from a casual birding trip, because we have to keep track of mileage and mode of transportation and time and species and count of individuals. But when you're new and you're participating and you may feel a little bit overwhelmed, I think it's important to just have the experience, because for example, there are people who are leading sections or compiling CBCs who want to retire at some point. And there are some people who want to retire because they're not accustomed to or comfortable with the technology that is available now. And so we want people who have dipped their toes in the pool, who have figured out that, hey, this is kind of fun. This is really kind of exciting, so that they can then receive the baton as it's passed from their predecessors and continue the 120 plus year tradition of the Christmas bird counts. So that kind of succession planning is important. And I know that it sounds self-serving. I guess it is, but it really is a wonderful thing to pass along to the next generation of birders. And, that, as I said, the technology changes, and there are some people who say, well, eBird is going to make, Christmas bird counts obsolete. But I don't think that it is, because of, as you know, the protocol for doing a census is not the same thing as dropping an eBird checklist. So having people who are comfortable with the technology of today, who have the energy and are ambulatory, can get around the hillsides and the marshes and things like that, some older people might not be able to manage quite as well, is an important transition. That it's important to get back to the original point after this long journey around, it is to get new people to try it and to enjoy it.
And I think that's also an important point that you brought up earlier, is that there are ways to help and to be involved that don't necessarily require being able to identify every species out there that you might see or hear. That if you're not as comfortable with that because you are newer, that you can be a data collector and be in charge of that. And that's a very important job, because if you're trying to concentrate on identifying all the birds you're seeing and hearing, then it takes energy, it takes thought. You have to take your eyes and ears away to say, where's my Canada goose? Okay, I just saw 5 of those.
Well, one other thing that I want to emphasize here too is the last thing that I said should not be interpreted as you have to be ambulatory or energetic or whatever. Birding is for everybody. It's for every body. That means that if you're in a wheelchair, or if you walk with a cane or a walker, or you have hearing assistance or sight assistance, we want you to help out too. I mean, there's a spot for everybody. If you can't get out and about from your house, we want you to be watching your feeders and documenting what's coming into your feeders. That's a contribution to the Christmas bird counts if you live inside the count circle too. So we are definitely wanting to send the inclusivity message, because everybody can help.
Yes, exactly. So how would somebody get involved if they're hearing this thing? Okay, maybe I might want to do this for the first time. What do you do?
So you should reach out. There's a number of places, and in the show notes, there'll be some links to the Audubon website. The Audubon website has a map of count circles. And if you zoom into your geography, you can click on the center point of the counts, or the literal circles that you will see on the map. It'll have the contact information for the compiler for that count circle. That's one way to do it. And another way to do it is there are a lot of birding Facebook groups, either at a state level or at a regional level. And a lot of us compilers will send messages out on those different social media channels to say, here's the count circle and the count date. please participate. A lot of birders use listservs, which is an old school kind of communication device that really does a good job of communicating to people who want to be in the know about what's happening birdwise in a geography. And so, we'll also use that as a means to communicate the dates and stuff. So the Kentucky Ornithological Society has a web page on our website that specifically it's under construction, but as soon as I start getting dates for all the Kentucky CBCs, for example, the dates, the contact information for the compiler will all appear there, and we'll update that, every few days until we get 100% of our dates confirmed. And again, some of the dates don't get confirmed until later on because some of our compilers are really particular about making sure that there's going to be good weather. So, and they have a team of dedicated participants who are willing to be flexible and wait until the compiler sets a date. But others, like Louisville, for example, we're always the first Sunday of the count period. Every single time, you don't have to know, you can plan it 10 years in advance, first Sunday of the count period. The count period is always fixed, December 14 to January 5. First Sunday, look it up on the calendar, that's the date. So, and it just depends on how things go. But so again, social media, listservs, reach out to people who are in bird clubs or bird organizations. They usually are in the know about at least how to get a hold of people who are. My contact information, if you happen to be in Kentucky, will be in the show notes as well. So I'm certainly happy to hear from anyone who would like to participate. I think that's about it. And also fantastic podcasts such as Backyard Ecology is a great way to figure out, just a fantastic different way. So, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, it's interesting. It's fun to learn about these things and to potentially go on them. And so you've been doing this for a while now.
Yes.
What are some of your stories? Because I'm sure you've seen some really cool things. Even if they're birds that you see all the time and they're not rare, sometimes you just see really interesting behavior or hear them or just anything. So what are some of your favorite stories?
Yeah, so a lot of mine are kind of old ones just because, they sort of grow in nostalgia. But one of my favorite birding experiences happened during a Christmas bird count, and it ties into my flow state comments that I made a little earlier. A friend of mine, Bob Richter, and I were in the boat party in Jacksonville, Florida. We were offshore, calm waters, glassy calm waters. We happened to float over a big school of fish. We turned off the boat motor and just sat there for 5 to 10 minutes as a group of about 100 northern gannets were plunging into the sea, catching fish just all around us, all around the boat, just one after the other, just diving in from, they sort of hover around 30 feet and just drop straight down to catch fish. And just hearing the splash just feet away and watching this was a spectacle I'm never going to forget. Another example is in St. Augustine, Florida, where on the way out in the morning, we saw a Christmas bird count first common eider at near a particular buoy marker. And then we birded throughout the whole day. And on the way back, within 500 feet of the same buoy marker, we got a CBC first long-tailed duck.
Oh, wow.
Photographed both. And, again, it was just a remarkable coincidence and luck, obviously. Nothing to do with skill. It was just, there they were. But so those are just some examples of things that, maybe they're count firsts, maybe they're just spectacular, behavioral spectacles that you're just privileged to be a part of because you got up that morning, you pulled on your wool socks and you threw on your rain jacket and you went out to go birding. You get the privilege of seeing and experiencing these things that other people don't. And it just really feels special when it's part of that whole CBC experience that I just really hope that people will take to heart and consider jumping into, because we need help. And I can't guarantee you're going to get birds. I can't guarantee that you're going to have, mindful experiences like I've tried to describe there, but you will be helping people. You will be helping gather data that's important so that it can be, that's the one thing about CBCs too that's wonderful, is that because of the way that the protocol is set up and that the data are gathered, you can compare apples to apples for your count circle back in time, also your count circle against any other count circle on the planet. And that's the beauty of the protocol, is that it's designed so that you can make those comparisons. And just being a part of that bigger picture thing is meaningful to people as well, because they're part of a citizen science project, as you mentioned, long-term. It's a community of birders that, like-minded, conservation-minded people that, in my experience, are pretty great people. I think Ted Floyd in the American Birding Association had an article that he wrote about the things I like about birders. And one of them is, they believe in science, they're conservation-minded, they're generally critical thinkers, and they're good people. And that's the community that I love to be a part of. And all of the people that I've met in birding have had that sort of vibe or personality that's just it's a joy to be around.
It always is. It's always fun to go out with birders. And like you said, you can see so many different things. I mean, being in the boat with the gannets around you, oh my gosh, that must have been amazing.
I will never forget that. But it's not just birders too, by the way, because if you're birding with someone, not necessarily CBC, another joy about like-minded people, if there's no birds around and you've got someone who knows their butterflies, it's also fun to learn about that. Dragonflies, plants, you can always learn something, and different people have expertise, different knowledges that you don't share, that it just, Thomas Jefferson said something along the lines of, if you use my candle to light your candle, it doesn't diminish the light of my candle. But that sharing of information, the generous sharing of information among like-minded people, is just a great thing. And I think that's what I love about Christmas bird counts, especially because it's that teamwork and it's global, and it's just great.
Oh, yes, exactly. And you're so right too. I mean, maybe not so much on Christmas bird count day because you've got that focused scientific thing that you have to do. But yes, there's been many a times when I've been laughed at because I'm on a birding trip with people and all of a sudden I get fascinated by the plants and I'm over there, and I'm usually not the only one. Sometimes I'm the first one, sometimes I'm the follower, but rarely am I the only one. Or I'm on a plant trip and next thing we know, we're birding or chasing butterflies, because like you said, it all just leads one thing to the next.
Yeah, and it's interactive too. It's here's a plant. No, well, we're here on a butterfly trip. Well, this is the host plant for such and such, and this is the birds eat these berries, and here's how the seeds propagate through the digestive tract of a bird, or attached to the fur of a deer, whatever the case is. It's just it's fun to think about that interplay between species and life forms. It's great.
Oh, yes, exactly. And then, like you said, to be able to share that and to build off of each other's knowledge, because none of us know everything. And we all know different pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, we think we might know a little bit about everything, but we don't.
Well, thank you so much, because this has been really, really interesting. And like I said at the beginning, your passion and enthusiasm for this really shines through. And I think we're going to be having you back to talk about a few other things in the future. But yes, this has been absolutely wonderful. And like you said before, I will have your information in the show notes in case anybody wants to contact you, especially if they're in Kentucky and need to know more about getting involved in the Christmas bird count. And I'll also have links in the show notes to the Audubon Society's page on the Christmas bird count and some of that other information that we've talked about. But again, thank you so much for talking to us today, James, and have a great day.
Thank you very much, Shannon. It's been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your podcast.
Thank you so much. Yes. Well, take care and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I really appreciate James taking the time to talk with us. It is obvious that he loves birding, participating in the Christmas bird count, and helping others get involved. I highly encourage anyone who is interested to look into participating in your local CBC. If you're listening to this episode when it first comes out, then you'll still have approximately a week before this year's first Christmas bird counts begin. If you aren't listening to this episode when it first comes out, then whether you still have time to get involved this year or will have to wait until next year will depend on how long it has been since the episode aired. Either way, participating in a Christmas bird count is a great thing to consider if you enjoy birding and would like to be able to help make a difference and contribute to a long-standing scientific database. Not to mention, make some new friends and have fun hanging out with other like-minded people. Before I wrap this up, I wanted to remind you about my email list. Every week, I send a short email with links to the most recent Backyard Ecology blog article, podcast episode, and video, as well as any other news of interest. It's the best way to make sure that you never miss anything in the backyard ecology world. You'll also get a free e-booklet as my gift to you when you join my email list. If you haven't signed up, then I encourage you to do so at www.backyardecology.net/subscribe. You can also find a link in the show notes. Until next week, I encourage you to take some time to enjoy the nature in your own yard and community.